Hi, I'm Ann Delisi.
And I'm Chef James Rigato.
And in this episode of Essential Cooking, we speak with Abby Olitzky, who runs Spencer, a restaurant and wine shop in Ann Arbor. We talk about what brought Abby to Michigan from San Francisco and about the challenges of finding good seasonal produce during Michigan's winter months. One thing that makes me curious is when people transplant from another part of the country and they end up here. Yeah. And you have a story about that, and you're from San Francisco, and so a lot of people might think of going the other way, but you came here. Yeah. And I'd love for you to start by talking about how you ended up in Ann Arbor.
So I ended up in Ann Arbor because I met my partner, Steve, who is now my husband and business partner, but he was working at Mission Cheese at a cheese shop. It's like a cheese and wine shop. And I was working down the street at Delfina, which was a restaurant that did like Italian, Northern California Italian food. And we just met because I just was grabbing a bite of cheese with my friends and wine. And we kind of just started a relationship very quickly. I talk about this, but within less than 6 months, we decided to move to Detroit, presumably open a restaurant. Without even like having moved in with this person. This was a really not smart idea. It's now been like 10 years ago, so it's fine.
Yeah, it worked out.
Yeah, but honestly, when I think about it, I was like, this is not something I'd recommend to like my daughter.
But so let's see, what year would this have been? So we know
it'll be about 10 years in December when I met
2012.
him. Yeah.
Thereabouts.
Yeah. And San Francisco was so expensive. We definitely wanted to open something small that was our own, and we just knew that we couldn't even afford rent there. You know,
where did you grew up in San Francisco?
I grew up in the city, yeah, and my parents still live there.
Oh, wow.
So I go back. I just was there like a month ago, so I go back a lot, and I get to see it.
What was your formative restaurant experience? Was Delfina?
Delfina. I also was in Point Reyes, California, which I really liked as well, and. Those were like the two big ones there. I stayed with Delfina for about 3 to 4 years. So
that's where you knew you're like, okay, I'm going to be a chef. I want to
No, I knew much. I went to culinary school in New York, and I knew before that.
Gotcha.
I really didn't even want to go to a traditional university. My parents really wanted me to. I think they did not want me to cook.
Where'd you go?
I went to NYU for college.
Oh, it's not for culinary.
They don't have a culinary. They have a food studies program, which I then found out about and started minoring in, which I really loved, which is like food anthropology, but also just like food sociology and studies. And I loved it and was like, yeah, this is always what I wanted to be doing, which is weird because I could have gone a more academic route with it, but I just knew I really wanted to be cooking. We already had a chef in the family, my cousin, and I think my mom was like, this does not seem like a good idea.
Charlie's a little crazy, drunk all the time. I don't want
That is exactly what happened. Like he had like an alcohol abuse problem. Like he just wasn't a healthy cook.
Oh my goodness, it was true. Okay.
Yeah, it was definitely true. And I think my mom was like, this is not a good career for you. And I was like, yeah, it's great.
Well, wait a second. I want to go back to food anthropology for a second, because I don't know if people know what that is and what you do with that, or what you learn when you take this course of study, and where that would take you if you didn't cook.
So it doesn't take you that far, except for academia, to be honest.
And what do you learn in
So food
that
anthropology
arena?
is mostly the study of like other cultures or and their like food ways, essentially. But it can also be, I definitely like the food sociology part, which is a little bit more of like, it's still historical, but is less like what were certain, people eating in the year,
Oh, okay.
It's like,
what did we find in this mummy's stomach?
Yeah, I don't really care that much about that. I really liked the food sociology part, which was, I remember learning about Detroit and food deserts and what that meant. And like just feeling like I got to learn about, people's food ways and food cultures around the world was so interesting to me, and how they develop that, or how they continue to get influenced by different things, both politically and socially.
And so how did that serve you when you started cooking?
I think I realized how much I had already been absorbing, as I already was so interested. I was one of those people who already was reading cookbooks and wanted to read as much about food as I could. I think that just helped me feel like I came from it I think very thoughtfully, and also just I just feel like now my direction is just so strongly myself. I feel like that it's hard for me to, I don't try to cook other people's cultures. I try to, so it's like kind of weird now to think about it and where it's come from. That was not a great answer. I don't love that. Okay.
No, I think it's a really good answer because it's complicated. I mean, it sounds like, you're a different chef now than you were then.
Yes.
And you look at food differently, but your end result, or where you are now at least, would have been different had you not I think explored all of these cultures.
Yeah.
Well,
it's part of your formative years as a chef, I'm sure.
I think it's like with music, like, really original artists still listen to music all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's, you listen to so many, and you don't want to sound like, I don't want to play piano like this person, but like, you still can absorb it. So I think that that's an important part of learning about the history of food, why these things exist, how they exist. It helps you create an identity because you're just more coherent in what food is.
Yeah.
And I will say, I mean, I eat at Spencer a lot, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but like, you really have a great style. I mean, I feel like every time I go there, I'm like, oh, that's really smart, or that's so simple. Like, I usually just order everything because I don't care, because it's always great. And that leads me to ask you, like, what was your highest position in a restaurant that wasn't yours?
I mean, honestly, it was just being a pastry chef at Delfina. I worked the line before, and then a lot of times, which happens to women a lot, they're like, well,
yeah, you should do pastry.
You should do pastry.
Yeah.
We have this great position for, like you can learn. And honestly, the mentor I had there was so wonderful. I loved her. And then she left like pretty quickly when they were like, do you want this pastry chef job? And I was like, okay.
And I don't ask to give you a status. I love that, because to me, I think sometimes when you find chefs that worked in, like, I was a CDC under this person for 10 years, you can feel it. It's almost like they're indoctrinated, where like, I feel like you have a freedom in your food that comes from never having been overly programmed by the industry. Obviously, you're inspired. And you're
no, I think you're right about that. I always kind of knew that going into, like my food doesn't feel like Delfina food. It doesn't not feel like a Northern California. I mean, some people eat at the restaurant and they're like, this tastes like I'm in San Francisco. I'm like, ooh, that was not the intention, since I want it to taste like you're in Michigan. But I understand that the philosophy, what they're saying is that like there's this kind of California philosophy behind cooking that I think people sometimes taste, of just like, simple.
When you got to Ann Arbor, well, you intended to open a restaurant in Detroit proper, and that changed, right?
It did change, yeah. I think we talked a lot to Di and Jess at Astro and Ochre. We kind of explored the city with them. They were so helpful and really kind. And I think we had just, Steve's parents are from Ann Arbor. Oh, okay. So that was our landing spot, which I think was kind of like, we were living in their basement. And so I think I was kind of just more motivated to maybe like not be living in their basement more than I was to like move to Detroit, without any like people to help us in certain ways. So I think I just started to realize I liked Ann Arbor. It kind of reminded me of Berkeley, that like, it's a little bubble. It's its own little thing. It's
very Berkeley. And it's, when I think about Spencer, I think about the history of, like, I grew up in Howell, north of Ann Arbor. So I used to always go, that was like my cultural reprieve, because Howell's, I always say, is a dead zone, no offense, but it's like a cultural dead zone. So I would always go to Ann Arbor to try to, whether it was hash bash or skateboard with friends, or just, go get fun food. But there was never really a place like Spencer. And that's not to take away. It's just that there was easily a space for you. I can see being in the basement, thinking about a restaurant concept and being like, okay, I think this town actually will have us.
Yes. Yeah. I think the town can have a lot more too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of restaurants that come and go in Ann Arbor.
Definitely. It's a transient community. All the students.
I think that's part of the problem. I mean, it's also hard to find, people to work because they're transient. You only get certain people for a few years because their partner's going to school, or, like it's just a lot of.
Yeah, but your model, I mean, Ann, and I'm not sure if you've been to Spencer, not to throw you under the bus.
Right.
But I've been many times. And essentially you walk in, it's a wine, it's kind of like it's veiled as a wine shop. Like I can almost see somebody thinking it's a wine shop.
It's now, half wine shop.
Yeah. So you walk in like, oh, I want a bottle of wine. And then the way you basically order at the counter and you sit down, and then you have the things that you order brought to you. So it's kind of like a condensed service. So it's not like a full-fledged, like, sit down, the waiter visits, et cetera. So I look at it operationally, I'm like, this is so smart. Their footprint with their team can be minimal, but their impact can be grand. And then, you're experiencing, I find it to be like where I'm like, I get up there, I'm like, I want, give me 2 bottles of wine and everything on the menu, because I want to experience it all. And the menu is designed to where I'd say 2 people can kind of handle it, but 3 to 4 people can eat the whole menu.
Yeah.
And
so it's kind of changed since the pandemic, which has been its own thing where we've just made things a little bit, I don't know, we're doing this prefix menu that changes every 2 weeks because basically this was what we noticed was everyone was just ordering the whole menu. And I was like, we can just
do a prefix.
Just order the whole menu this way. And so that's what we started doing, but we still have our like wine patio that essentially is that. You can just like sit down, order a bunch of wine snacks and wine, and it's a little bit more relaxed. Although I think our dinner menu is just as relaxed as well in terms of like what we're putting out there. Like the prefix, I always feel like gets a weird, since just being in England, like prefix is just so common there. And it doesn't mean it's a certain type of like class or fancy level, right? It doesn't mean that. It just means this is what we're serving today and this is how much it cost. While I feel like here, when you say the word prefix, you're like, too fancy, not going. And it's like, actually, it's not a tasting menu. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
It's just a prefix menu.
Well, I think what people forget, too, about prefix menus is it's really designed to make the restaurant flow easily with a smaller footprint of staff. So, like, I encourage all operators out there to consider offering a prefix, and to the people consuming meals out there, the customer base, like, definitely familiarize yourself because it's really the best bet for restaurants. A 35-item menu is a nightmare. And, when you do a prefix, it's basically the chef making 8 delicious things and giving you a choice to choose 4 of them. Like, that is really a smarter way to run a restaurant.
Do you think that's become more popular since the pandemic? I feel like I see that more on more menus and more chefs are doing it at more restaurants since the pandemic. I don't know why, but it just feels like less is best. Less is more in some ways. And
I think you're also, your scope from where you're sitting, like you kind of deal with the chef community. So I think your feed probably shows that. The restaurant industry at large, I think, is still just a hot mess.
I see.
But I think that the upper crust of restaurants are probably leaning in that direction more, especially for I'm sure for you guys, the supply chain is such a mess right now. If you're trying to offer 12 different proteins, there's no chance they're all showing up, and intact and on time. There's no way.
I mean, I really struggle with protein sourcing actually. And I just feel like the laws in Michigan prohibit us to like really get good animals.
It's a whole nother podcast, I think.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't even need to get into it, but it drives me insane.
Well, no, there's many times where your menu has like one.
I mean, this menu coming back, there's none. It's just vegetarian.
Yeah.
Cause it's like, I love our corn agnolotti. I want to put it on the menu. It's the season for it. So it's going on, like that's,
You'll even have like halibut cheek or like ham.
And
that's which I love. I love that.
Yeah, but this is an opportunity to do it right and just do one thing really, really well.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure as a chef, it allows you some sort of freedom to say, okay, I'm just going to explore vegetables. This is what we're going to do. It just is fascinating to me, like how I'm fascinated by a musician that makes something from nothing, like somebody that writes a song, creates something from nothing. You guys create different things. I mean, we've seen so many foods the same way, the same approach for our whole lives. But you guys will look at the same ingredients almost and turn them into something magical in a way that we have never seen them before. And to me, that's like writing a song or creating a song from not necessarily nothing, but to put a different vantage point on something that we've eaten our whole lives is, to me, absolute brilliance. And that's what you guys do. And is that exciting, or is it always a challenge, but a fun challenge? Like, how do you look at like coming up with a new menu? Like, Abby, you're going back at it, and you're going to be putting together a brand new menu after being shut down for a couple weeks. To me, that's like, oh, wow. Kind of starting over in a weird kind of way.
I mean, it helps because every 2 weeks I have to like remind myself of the direction I want to be in and what it feels like. There's definitely limitations to prefix. It's not exactly how I want people to fully enjoy the food. I mean, the limitations is honestly like sometimes even the table size. Like I like the idea of like a generosity. Like I want a lot of plates, and I hate the word small plates, but I just want a lot of food on the table that have been prepared differently. I think it's so exciting. I just think it has this like, I want to feel like this relaxed, like you're at my dinner table and this is how I want to feed you. Like that's the kind of direction I want it to go. I want to say that the Ann Arbor farmers is kind of why I stayed, because I started to realize that there was such an amazing farming community right around Ann Arbor, right? Like Green Things Farm is less than 2-3 miles away from me. Like that's just a really incredible thing. But like all of them that come to the farmers market, but also I get to then go to their farms and start to interact with them, was just really like, I never got to do that in San Francisco. Close farms in San Francisco are still 20 miles away.
Okay.
Which is like a really big, at least, and it's taking them an hour to drive into the city, and you're going to go visit maybe on the weekends, or it's just not the same as me. Like, oh, I forgot to get something, I'm just going to run to this farm is such a wonderful thing to get to do.
Black perspectives haven't always been centered in the telling of America's story. Now, we're taking center stage. Introducing NPR's Black Stories, Black Truths, a collection of Black-led stories from NPR's podcasts. Search NPR Black Stories, Black Truths wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I think Michigan is such an agricultural state. We don't have the weather that, Central California has. I mean, when you look at fruit in California, you're like,
artichokes
oh my God.
and figs. And I can name them all that I miss a lot. But
yeah. No, but it's true. I mean, California really dunks on it. Sometimes when I feel like there's there's a big spotlight on California chefs, rightfully so. But sometimes I'm like, you guys, this is all farmer work. You're really, and I feel like that way a lot, especially in the summer.
I know David Chang once came to San Francisco and made this huge thing you guys aren't good. It's just your food. It's just this produce. And I remember everyone being like, get out of here. And I do agree. It's Alice Waters boldly, I think fed President Bill Clinton just a bowl of peaches.
Yeah.
They weren't done. There was nothing done. She just were like, these are amazing peaches.
And there's to me there's nothing wrong with that. Right now,
I think it's more of a statement and a political statement rather than actually, which I think is great.
But right now, I have dishes. Summertime in Michigan is probably the closest we get to the San Francisco approach.
Yes,
because we just have amazing products. Like right now, I'll do a tomato salad. Oh, you slice it nicely, make sure the temperature is good. You got to salt each edge with sea. It's like you're kind of cooking. You're you're garnishing already perfect product.
Exactly.
Now cooking in January in Michigan, that's like sculpting something. You're taking, it's like, okay, we have root vegetables, we have some hardy winter greens, some greenhouse vegetables, and basically large cuts of meat. Go. And then it takes days to make flavor in the winter.
It's definitely tough in winter.
But so to me, I think that's what makes Michigan challenging. Like you're asking, Ann, that's what makes Michigan challenging is the seasonality. But that's what I find fun is when it's on an ice storm, I'm when people are like, oh, we should close tonight. I'm like, hell no, let's get in there and braise something. I want I want a bolognese when that weather is like that. And right now, I'm sure you said corn and Lodi. You can't if you serve a boar bolognese right now, you're probably a lunatic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, especially because right now to expand our seating, it's all outside. So I'm really sensitive about what temperature. Yeah. Because I'm if it's 90 degrees and you're eating food, that's just already hard.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. The raw things and the cold things.
Yeah.
I love cooking this time of year because it's so weather dependent.
Yeah.
Or even wines, especially. I mean,
oh, yeah.
I'm sure with you when you're like, okay, let's serve a chilled red tonight because
we rarely have a big red on the menu during the summer. It just feels like it doesn't even. I mean, people can order it because we have a wine shop. You can go and get a big red if you really want it, but. Yeah, I mean, Steve is struggling to make sure he loves chilled reds, and so he's chilling them all, trying to make sure.
I love chilled reds.
I know, so he's trying really hard. And it is funny.
We have such a problem, and this is, I'm sure this is it's had to be a learning curve for you because I'm amazed at the amount of 16% alcohol, rich red wine that Michiganders drink. I consider it steak sauce. I can barely stomach the stuff, but when I watch, I'm I'll see someone sit down. 90 degrees outside, walk in, a little bit of sweat on their brow, sit down and order a glass of Cabernet.
No, they
for the
don't.
first thing, of course. And I'm like, you're wild. I mean, and I'm not judging, like, live your life, but like, I just think you're just wild.
Yeah.
Can you,
Yeah.
you can't
No.
put a big red in front of
No.
me for the first course. I think it's just wild.
Yeah. I mean, I just also really like wine to be really playful too and fun and not too stuffy. So sometimes I'm like bogged down by the big reds anyways. Like I don't want any pomp and circumstance to my wine. Steve feels a little differently. He's a little bit more like historical and understanding than I am, I would say. That's probably why he runs the wine program and I
Sure.
don't. Because otherwise I'd just be like, I'm just drinking, glue juice and nothing else. And he would be like, oh God.
I know. I'd probably be like champagne only today.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, that is Steve's real dream is champagne only.
Oh,
so
God. I mean, I think that's the best.
I love bubbles.
yeah,
Yeah,
me
more than
too.
anything.
Me too.
It's interesting listening to you guys talk about, all of this stuff. But James, to your point about the change in seasons and the challenges that come with it, but how exciting it is. Like, I like living in a place where there's 4 seasons because there's a rhythm to all of that. We have this anticipation of when things are going to change and what's coming next. But the way the food changes, like the thought of having a big hearty meal in the fall and in the winter, it's just a lovely thought even. We're not even close to there yet. But then the lightness of the summer and the excitement of the spring. But the challenges fascinate me and how you have to look at food and what is going to always be delicious and what is always going to be appealing. Has it gotten more challenging as the climate changes? Like, has when food is ready changed at all? Are things more readily available or not because things are hotter and longer and maybe the time of the seasons have changed? Do you guys as chefs notice any difference in the food that is being produced because of it?
Well, we've had conversations before with like Michelle Lutz about
Yep.
how broccoli grows, or the public, once kids are back in school, I feel like the public is like pumpkin spice and like September.
You're totally right. You're like, September's the best month for
September is literally
produce.
like
End of story.
in September into I mean, nowadays, like, you can get tomatoes all the way into mid-October depending on
Yeah.
the season. And like, our relationship with pumpkin is totally skewed because we think pumpkin pie, which is Thanksgiving, when pumpkins are actually great in like mid-October, late September. Pumpkins are like fruit, just like all the, they're gourd, but they fruit essentially on a vine. So I mean, you'll see pumpkins like end of August, like,
Yeah.
So we have a kind of weird relationship with food because of like holidays and seasonality. And if you ask Sam, my farmer girlfriend, she'll get real deep on like the year. Like, we're all off as like spirits because the year essentially should start in spring, because that's really what the earth is doing.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So she I could talk for days about it, but yeah, I think that the public, like the holidays and like the traditions, are not in tune with nature. So the idea of a tomato salad in like October, it could still be some of the best tomatoes of your life, but you're emotionally wanting, pumpkin spice, lattes and risotto, when the world is telling you to eat corn still,
Right. That's
Yeah.
interesting that our palates are attuned to something that is not the food.
Yeah, right. Well, think about when you see Halloween, you start seeing jack-o'-lanterns.
Yeah.
You start seeing like Halloween outfits. You're thinking about cider and donuts.
All the stuff,
you know?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just shows kind of sometimes people's, we're really out of touch with seasons and what actually comes in those seasons and when they come. Because there are these subtle changes that happen in the summer. There's even more. I mean, I think it's always so interesting to see what, like peppers haven't really started yet, right? Like green ones have, but like there's not really the red ones yet. They're just starting. But like every week there's kind of something new that comes out.
Oh, yeah.
And there's kind of something new that goes away. And I think I'm always shocked to find where people are just surprised still, like, oh, that's here right now? Or like, we can't get that. I remember when we first opened, I do not have these people working for me anymore, but they would be like, oh, would take them to the farmer's market just so they could see what was going on. They're like, do you think we'll find kiwis there or avocados? And I was like, no, because that doesn't grow here. Like, it was just it's a learning experience to like realize what is actually in a grocery store isn't necessarily what's being grown in, around you. And I think that always takes a lot of learning from both, I wouldn't say, like, I feel like my customers are amazing and they've learned, but and they're very knowledgeable. But I think a lot of times we just aren't aware. Like there's such a, like there's a disconnect between those two worlds, which is so funny to me because they're like the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Like a grocery store should be providing produce that makes sense. But, with our markets, we can get anything any time of year.
Yeah. And it's to your point, Ann, the music industry is broken, right? So is the food industry.
Yeah.
So we're working inside of a very broken system. So we have corporations, we have, school systems, we have, everything is working against us. So you basically have, look at, people think seasonality based on Panera billboards. It's strawberry season. Well, no, actually, that's the first berry.
Yeah.
And now
it's going to actually take 2 months in Michigan to get going. So.
Now it's now we're on cherry. It's
Yeah.
So you look at what slushy Sonic is doing, what's Panera doing, and that's what people think is seasonality. Pumpkin spice, which actually has no pumpkin in it, which a lot of people maybe don't even know, but it's these are just a blend it's almost like chai, where it's well, why can't we just talk about chai? Chai is actually cool year round.
Or I think about quatre épices, the little 4-spice blend. That's basically pumpkin spice blend all year round. That's used on most pork items in France.
Exactly. And to me, garam masala, there's a lot of spice blends out there where it's why does it, what? So it's interesting to be in food because you want to be an ambassador. And then sometimes it sounds like you're being either, too stuffy if you're arguing about kiwis and avocado. I'm with you, but you're I don't think I've ever bought a kiwi in Mabel Gray's history, and so and I'm not. I like kiwis, but I just don't think about them. You know?
Well, in California, I got kiwis in the winter. That was something that happened. So there were things I had to learn by just coming here and realizing no, none of that grows here. There is seasons in California, which people are like, no, they're not, but there are. But the fact is we just get a lot more produce all year round.
Yeah.
It feels very consistent in the amount that you get. And here it's there can be really lean times. I find in February and March, I am it is a painful time. And it makes me feel how much more should I have preserved or thought about in the summer? It's definitely the hardest time to figure things out. Sometimes I feel I'm only getting spinach and the root crops that I try to pre-buy all these root crops, but they just don't last till February and March.
Mm-hmm.
The end of the story is you can't really keep them unless you've preserved them or done something. But I can't keep them like that. I once tried to buy so much winter squash being I can run this all winter. But by February and March, they're going bad. They just can't stay. I don't have a root cellar, which I think would probably help things.
If you had a root cellar, let me ask you, how long can you keep? Could you keep root vegetables in it?
Squash. You said, I think winter squash is too thin-skinned. I don't think it can't fight back well. Acorn, pumpkin.
I bought all these acorns and they started just because I didn't have a root. It was just in this ambient, temperature. It just, they started to go.
I think they sell our apples in the Pacific Northwest. You're eating a Honeycrisp in July. That's not, that's not a new apple.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you can do it, but you definitely have to have some infrastructure. And, in a restaurant setting, no, you probably can't get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or it's how do I, my new thing is how do I tell farmers, can I buy all your carrots?
But
can
you
keep
hold on
them,
to it, yeah.
Can you keep them in the ground?
Yeah.
Until that
That's so
weird
interesting.
springtime where I could come and get them.
Well, there's actually Cherry Capital I do a lot with those guys up in Traverse.
Yeah.
And they there's carrot farmers that'll leave carrots in the dirt, but in the barn.
Yeah.
So you kind of harvest them as you go. So that's the thing about Michigan is we're a huge state, and the farming community has been beat up for so long, and monocropping took over, for decades. So now you have people fighting back. They're not. You have to have multiple farms and vendors in order to run a restaurant. People get confused about what farms to use. I'm I don't know, 30 different, nobody can just provide endless amounts of crops year round. And usually it's I have a bean farmer, Kevin at Sheridan Acres up in Bad Axe, and he does heirloom beans, and they're incredible. And I was talking to him, I'm is this your full-time gig? He's no, it's a hobby. Being a bean farmer right now can't pay his bills. And that's a crime because he's the best bean farmer. His beans are gorgeous. And it's what do you mean? What can he sell? $2 a pound for heirloom black beans? It's a crime. Farmers have it worse than anybody. And so I think at the core of what you and I do is just trying to showcase how amazing food is because of farmers.
Yeah. Yeah. Because of nature and farming and good sustainable farming practices that make things taste even better, I think, you know, like when there's more of a holistic approach to the, you know, to everything. I just was, so we're bringing back 2 wheels of Westcombe cheddar. Westcombe, we went to go visit there, and it's just like this, and he was talking about his cheddar, and I was surprised Steve picked this cheddar because he was really going in there for Montgomery's cheddar. This is like the famous English cheddar, and he picked the Westcombe instead, and we went there, and we were talking to Tom, who is now the 2nd generation. He has been, like, it's been in, like, kind of running since the 1870s, this cheddar place, but his kind of new holistic approach of like what he was doing, and the fact that like Steve could really recognize that just by tasting it at Neil's yard. I mean, he was like, I just care about what my cows are eating. Like, we're just making sure we're not planting these monocultures. And he was like, but now I realized, you know, I want to start, I realize I have all this grain. So now I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do with all this grain. So he's now sending it off to a bakery in Bristol to make beautiful like sourdough bread. And he's just like creating this almost like whole farm ecosystem around the fact that he makes cheddar, which I thought was just like so beautiful and cool. And I was like, this man is, you know, like I want to see more of that being like happening, because I realized there are always byproducts of farming. It's not a perfect system, but that you can use, you know, he's trying to find people to eat the dairy cattle. And I was like, that's amazing. You know?
So like, I mean, that's so, Ireland is doing that a lot right now. England.
Because they're like, these cows are like wonderful. They're eating wonderful things. They're like out in the most beautiful place on earth, and people just don't want to eat them.
And the meat's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I mean, I just was at a restaurant in Galway, Lignum, and their entree was, you know, basically an aged, you know, dairy. It's like a 7 or 9 year old cow, I think.
Yeah.
And then, so people think that's, because I mean, most cows you eat in America are like a year and a half old, you know, I mean, they're pretty young. And so, yeah, I mean, you're the old expired animal, but I mean, I don't view it that way. I think it's all connected.
It was so cool to watch like these kind of, and I realized like, you know, more and more of the farms we're even working with kind of are trying to do, you know, they have to do things in order to make other things work for themselves.
And usually it's like revenue streams, or it's like utilizing products.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's really how the society was built, you know, in these micro food systems. And, you know, now we have a global economy and parts of it are failing. So yeah, it's like I said, it's interesting being inside of the food system in America and trying to, you know, COVID, nothing really changed. It just got worse. All these things you're seeing always existed. It just, now they're exploited.
Yeah.
So yeah, this food system is pretty broken. But I do think that restaurants like Spencer are these beacons of hope, at least for me as a chef, where I'm like, yes, this place matters. You're doing it right.
Our thanks to Abby Olitzky for joining us. Thanks to you for listening, and
we would like to thank La Marca Prosecco for their support. From the hills of Veneto, Italy, you can never go wrong with Prosecco, whether it's in a spritz or drinking straight.
Essential Cooking is produced by me, Ann Delisi, along with my co-host James Rigato. This episode was edited, mixed, and mastered by Connor Anderson, with production support from David Lyons and Patrick Burness. Original music by the Mallet Brothers. Essential Cooking is a production of WDET, Detroit's NPR station.